Hey everyone, so let's open the project that we ended with in our last video. So you can go to File, Open Folder, and I'll go to my project, which is basically this simple AI app. And once I select that folder, it will open that project folder in Cursor. We ended our last video by creating 3 cursor rules file under .cursor rules directory. One having to do with meta information about how to create cursor rules. Another one having to do with how to implement type safety. And third one, defining rules around UV package management. Let's go ahead and modify our README file, which if you look at it currently, it's assuming that this is a pip project, which is obviously not true. We will ask cursor agent to modify README file with appropriate package management guide. We will be using Gemini 3 Pro, which is recently released frontier model from Google. And our assumption is that because our UV package management rule file is always apply, it will form part of the model context when cursor agent tries to modify README file. And you can confirm that we have UV package management among the rules file which are currently active and part of cursor agent's model context. Okay. As you can see, it's replacing a lot of pip commands with UV commands. So as you can see, it's modified the README file. Though if you have already looked at my UV video, you'll realize that instead of pip, I rather use pipx to install UV and then UV sync in order to sync our project with dependencies in uv.log file, and then UV run to run our main.py file. So this looks good. I'll keep all the changes. Okay, so with that, we have now up-to-date package management information in our README file for people to clone this project and then run UV commands to get started. You can also preview our README file to confirm that those changes have indeed been made. So as you can see, we now have UV sync and pipx install UV commands here, and then UV running our main.py file. Okay. So with that out of the way, let's get to implementing type safety. Let me open the terminal first. It helps to remember that currently our Mypy type checks will pass. Okay, so if I run uvx Mypy, it won't give me any type check errors. But our problem is not that our current code is type safe, but that our current code is very loosely typed at many places. For instance, there are places where it's using any, which is too broad or too loose as a type. And then there are places where it's not using any type at all. For example, this dictionary also should be strictly typed, and currently it's not. This is what we want cursor agent to solve, because we implemented this Mypy types before we created cursor rules for it. So the idea is that if we now prompt cursor agent to implement type safety, it will actually not just run this command and be fine with our current state, but it will also take inputs from our type checking rule file and modify code to implement more strict and more specific or narrow types. So let's go ahead and prompt cursor agent to implement type checks. Okay. Now, before I proceed, it is worth remembering the way cursor agent manages context. So we are already aware that anytime we include rule files, especially if our rule files are to be always applied, they will form part of model context before every user prompt. The moment we send this prompt, the AI model will receive not just this prompt, but also the contents of our 3 currently active rule files. Now, in addition to our prompt and the rule files, cursor agent will also send our conversation history to AI model. So this is similar to what we have already implemented at a superficial level in our chat config class, where every time we are sending an API call to OpenAI's API in this case, we are also maintaining and sending conversation history, so that AI model, which by itself will not maintain any memory or state, is still aware of our previous conversation. Cursor agent under the hood does something similar, which is why in this case we now have to get a bit more creative in terms of how much conversation history we want to give to AI model for every user prompt. Because remember that we get charged by the size of our context window. In this case, you can already see that we have used 13.2% of our context window, or almost 27k tokens. Okay. So if we now continue in the same chat session or same conversation session and send this user prompt, it will add to our current context window. But Our current prompt to implement type safety has nothing to do with our previous prompt, which was about modifying README to account for UV package management instead of pip. So this is where it is perhaps more appropriate to take this prompt and just start a new chat session. Our context window will start anew, and only things that will be included will be this prompt itself along with our rule files. So that way we can control the size of our context window. And obviously it's not just about cost. Anytime we include redundant or unnecessary information in our context window, we are risking quality of response from AI model might be less than optimal. And I'm purposefully keeping the prompt short because all the details around how to implement type safety will come from our rules file. So we don't need to explicitly describe it in the prompt. So yeah, let's go ahead and send this to Gemini 3 Pro and see what cursor agent comes back with. Reasoning through the process, it's reading the main.py file, checking for existing pyproject.toml file. When it comes to running commands, so in this case, what cursor agent is asking me is whether it can run uvx mypy main.py command, which is its attempt to type check our current project. If you look at this particular flag, use allow list, there are 3 different modes when it comes to running commands by cursor agents. So if you go to settings and you go to agents, go to this auto run section, you can see under auto run mode, you have use allow list. Then you have ask every time, which is basically the most restrictive mode where cursor agent will ask you every time before running any command. You also have opposite side of the spectrum, which is run everything, which might be too dangerous and free flowing, where cursor agent might end up creating and deleting some files without asking your permission. Okay, use allow list is basically a middle ground where cursor agent will ask your permission unless it's a command which has been added to this particular section, command allow list, in which case cursor agent will not seek your permission before running it. UVX is one of those commands, especially UVX mypy. It's just a type check. Cursor agent is not destroying anything or running any dangerous command. So this is one of those safe commands which we can include in our allow list. So if I select this option, allow list UVX, it will basically add UVX to our allow list commands. Okay, and in this case, now cursor doesn't need my permission to run this command, and it won't ask my permission when it wants to run it any other time. It's looking to better define type safety and refining data structure. It's revisiting chat config class, finalizing type definitions. Oh, interesting. It's actually converting chat config to a data class. So our current chat config has an init dunder method which initializes different attributes. Now if it converts it into data class, then it will get rid of this init method. It has already implemented that change where it has converted chat config into the data class and gotten rid of init method. Coming back to its chain of thought, and again it is running uvx mypy command recursively, and obviously it doesn't need my permission. Seems to have made the changes. So let's go ahead and review the changes it made. As you can see in this diff, that our cursor agent has added 23 new lines to main.py and deleted 13 lines from it. So let's go ahead and review the response. Obviously it has imported data class and filled and converted our chat config class into a data class. We'll review that later. It has imported type, dict and literal. My guess is that it has converted a lot of our dictionaries from very loose types to more precise types. Still disappointing that it is importing any. My guess is that it's still using any at many places where we would not like it to use it. You will probably change that. Okay, so for now, let's keep this part. So you can see that it's defining our messages to be typed dictionary now. If you remember our conversation history, which was basically a list of dictionaries where both keys and values are string. So this is how we previously typed our conversation history. But obviously this is loose typing because it's not just that we have a dictionary of key value pairs with both being string, but our keys will always be either role or content. And that is what has been defined more precisely here. So we have defined this Python class and it inherits from typed dict, which we imported here, and that allows it to define the keys of our dictionary as role or content. And if it's any other key except this two, then it will give us a mypy type check error. We can make this even more precise because the value for our role will not just be any string. It has to be either system, developer, user or assistant. So that is something which we can perhaps define here using literal. So we will define our message role and say it's already guessed I want user, assistant, developer or system to be my role, and then I'll change that in my message type dictionary. So now if I have any other role except this 4, then that also will be failing the type check error, okay? And content obviously can be any string. So I'll keep this. It has typed my models to be a dictionary of key value pairs where key is model type and values are a dictionary of string as key value pairs. This is still quite loose. I'll probably keep it for now, but I'll modify it later. And this is what we already saw in cursor agent's chain of thought reasoning, where it was trying to replace our conventional Python class where we have defined this init method explicitly into a data class. If you don't already know what data classes are, I'll link some videos for your reference, but it's basically substitute for explicitly defining a Python class, and instead we are now trying to define what is kind of a data model, okay? So it will still call a lot of this methods under the hood, but we don't have to do it explicitly, okay? It will do that work for us. And we only care about defining attributes directly. The model is supposed to be a string, model type is supposed to be model type. And again, if you have already noticed that model type was defined as a literal, where it can either be reasoning or non-reasoning. So if we give any other model type, then it will also fail. Type check max tokens is an int, temperature float, reasoning effort again is a literal between low, medium and high. Instructional message is a string, and conversational history now, instead of being a list of dictionaries, is list of message, which is our type dictionary. I'll explain this part. Why is it that we have to use this field call and what happens if we don't use it in next video, okay? I'll just have a short video to explain that. Not using field here will lead to some very weird bugs, just the way how Python works under the hood, but I'll explain that in the next video. For now, we'll just keep this. And obviously our get messages method now returns the list of message instead of list of dictionaries. And see, in this case, it has decided to ignore this type, but it has also explained why. We don't have to explicitly type it because Mypy can sometimes get very pedantic about typing, but we are already checking that our effort has to be in low, medium, high. So there is no need to explicitly type this, okay? It will always be among these three, otherwise it will go into this error conditional. So we'll just accept this. Yeah, see, this is disappointing because my expectation was that it will replace this any with more precise or narrow type, but it hasn't done it. So we'll modify this. But before we do that, let's modify this part because our models dictionary currently is needlessly complicated and nested. For example, we know that what we want to do here is models dict will always have either reasoning and non-reasoning keys, so that we can define using literal. And another thing is models dict will have some models depending on whether key is reasoning or non-reasoning, okay? So this two aspects will take into account in order to more narrowly type this models dictionary. So first, let us define models as typed dictionary. We will have either reasoning, and this is where we want it to be tuple that is made up of a certain set of reasoning models. And then we have non-reasoning. Now in this case, this syntax will not work because anytime you're trying to define a Python class, we cannot have attributes with hyphen in it, okay? This will violate Python's naming convention and give us a syntax error. So we'll have to convert our non-reasoning to have underscore instead of hyphen. What we'll now have to do is define reasoning models and non-reasoning models as literals, okay? So cursor is already suggesting that part to us. And with this done, we can type this as model. And obviously now we have to replace our values for reasoning and non-reasoning keys to have tuples, and replace this non-reasoning with hyphen with non-reasoning with underscore. So that's good, but we still have to make some changes to the other areas of our code, which will also not work now, but we'll do it later. First, let us type this more narrowly. We will add this to chat, type API params narrowly and get rid of any data type. Let's go ahead and see what it does. As usual, our active rules will have Mypy type checking rule under it. Okay, so it's now trying to define chat completion params type dictionary in order to more strictly and narrowly type API param, which is, I think, a reasonably good approach. Also noticing Gemini 3 Pro is kind of slower than Sonnet 4.5, and in all likelihood, it's a bigger model than Sonnet 4.5. So it seems to have changed model type. Oh yeah, right. I think we should have accounted for that already because we changed non-reasoning to have underscore and forgot to change model type. So this is a new typed dict data structure that it has defined that has all the parameters that we'll be including in our API params. So our model will be a string. In fact, our model should not just be a string, it should either be a reasoning model or non-reasoning model. And our messages is obviously list of message type dictionary, max tokens int, float is our temperature, max completion tokens int, and reasoning effort should be literal reasoning effort. So this looks good, I'll keep it. And it has defined model type to have default non-reasoning with an underscore instead of hyphen previously. It has also made some changes in the other areas of our code to account for the change that we made in our models dictionary. Okay. And this looks good, keep it. Because previously we had an entire dictionary nested inside our models dictionary, but now we have tuples made up of model names. So there is no need of using this. We can directly assign the model to our config.model. So we'll be keeping this, we'll be keeping this. And as we can see now, API params doesn't have any. It's more strictly, more narrowly typed using chat completion params type dictionary that we defined earlier. Model type again, it's replacing hyphen with underscore. Yeah, that's it. So let's open our terminal, run mypy type check just to make sure that everything's in working order, and it's not. So it failed to account for this error. Let us give it the context of that error and ask it to fix it. It has made too many changes. So it seems to have imported cast, created a new data type model name, which can either take reasoning models or non-reasoning models. It has defined model attribute in our chat completion params to be of type model name, which we already had. So there's no difference here. Okay, so this is basically the change that, in fact, you know what? What other change it made? Yeah, none of this is necessary. I'll just undo all of this because it ended up making too many changes needlessly. All we needed, we already have this as a union of reasoning models or non-reasoning models. But what we need to also change is this part where our model attribute in chat config data class should also be reasoning models or non-reasoning models. Let us rerun mypy type check. So this is a reason why it was importing cast. So if I go to this type error, in fact, if you look at it, it's already suggesting me to cast this model name as reasoning models type. But this is one of those cases where it would be an overkill to do that because we are already checking in our if conditional that the model name should be in models and reasoning key. So it will always be of reasoning model type. Again, this is Mypy being very pedantic about it. So this is one of the cases where we can actually ignore the type check as cursor is already suggesting to us because we are already checking for that assignment in our if conditional. And we'll do the same thing by using tab and ignore our type check in this case because both of those have already been taken care of in our conditionals here. Save that and rerun our mypy type check. This time it passes. So I think from the point of view of type check, this is good enough. Let us just run the application and make sure that nothing's broken. Okay, so we will uv run main.py. Okay, so let's check our configurations. As we can see, the model by default is GPT-4 Omni, and now our non-reasoning flag has underscore in it instead of hyphen. Then we can select models to check out what models we have. We can type help to check out all the commands we have. Change our maximum tokens to be 5000 instead of 500. So our max tokens set to 5000. Let us set our instruction to you are a geopolitical expert and always like to give detailed answers to use a question. Let us again check config to make sure that that system message has been accounted for. Let us ask AI model, what's the capital of Netherlands? And as you can see, it's sending this to AI model with our system prompt and our user prompt. Again, it comes back with a detailed response. Let's also use one of our reasoning models to make sure that is also working. We will use GPT-5 mini. So checking our configuration, our max tokens is 500, reasoning effort medium. Developer message, we'll like to keep it the same that we use for non-reasoning model, and we already have a conversation history. So we can assume that it already is aware of our conversation chain. So we'll ask what's the capital of Latin America? Okay, and then it will obviously tell us that it's not a country, but hopefully it gives us some response giving the capitals of different countries that make up Latin America. it sent this to AI model with our developer message, and then this is previous message history. This is the most recent prompt. It's telling me there is no single capital of Latin America, which obviously is true, and this is the response. Okay, so it seems like everything's working. Let me quit this application and clear this. Right, so it seems like our application is working and there is no regression, and our type check is more aligned with what production grade type check looks like. So before I end this video, let me just explain why we needed to use field while defining our conversation history, and what happens if we just use a normal list instead of this logic. So let me create a new dummy Python file. I'll delete it later. Just call it main2.py. Let me copy the chat config data class that we have here in our main.py file. We don't need a lot of this, so I'll just get rid of all the attributes and I'll just keep maximum tokens. We also have to indicate that this is a data class. So we have to import data classes, and we don't need all of this. We can also define a buggy chat config class. It's already doing that for us. Okay, so, and we have also not annotated our buggy chat config class as a data class, and that's for a reason which we'll come to know shortly. So let me now define main function to run this. I'll instantiate my buggy chat config class, then I'll add something to my conversation history, and then I'll instantiate another buggy chat config class. So this is supposed to be a different instance of my chat config class than this, but what will end up happening is this conversation history, which is supposed to be specific to C1 chat config instance, will end up being shared between C1 and C2 both. Let us also append a message to our C2. So now what will end up happening is both C1 and C2's conversation history will have both of these messages, which is not what we want. We want these two instances to be isolated. So let's just confirm that part first. Print C1 conversation history. Okay, and then we'll print C2 conversation history. Let's UV run our main2.py file. Oh wait, I've actually not called our main function. So let's run it. And as you can see, our C1 conversation history has both C1 and C2's conversation history, and the same goes for C2's conversation history. So this aspect of how Python classes will deal with what we call as mutable defaults or list objects is extremely tedious, because you can imagine this might lead to a lot of bugs downstream in your application, and it might be tedious to even debug them if you're not aware of how Python lists work under the hood. And this is precisely the part which this particular line, especially this field call, is trying to prevent. So what will end up happening if we now try to annotate this as a data class? So it's already asking us to use tab, and my guess is it will suggest to use field instead of a literal list. Let us see what happens now if we try to run our code. See, it's giving us a hard error, which is quite descriptive. If you look at this particular value error, if we are using a mutable default, and list is a mutable default data structure, then we should use default factory. So we should have a field call, and inside that we should use default factory, which is not what we have done. So essentially what Python is telling us is that you have to use a field call with default factory list as its argument. Now if we try to run this, not only will it run without giving us the error, but it will also ensure that conversation history is not shared between two different instances of our chat config. So as you can see, now our C1 conversation history has C1's conversation history, and our C2's conversation history has C2's conversation history. So that's the reason why we need to use this field call when we are defining a mutable default in our data class. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching this.